Today we're going to do a bit of a reaction to this Sports Card Radio live stream regarding backyard breaks and this potential hanky-panky and hotbox nonsense with regards to Panini, whatnot, so on and so forth. We're going to talk through this in a bit more detail. Specifically, we're going to flag a few updates for you all that I have since the live stream occurred. We're going to talk through a few of the things that happened within the live stream itself regarding, people like Backyard Brad and why his response to Sports Card Radio was pretty comical in my opinion, and I'll get to that in a second, so don't come at me if you're a friend of the guy. I'll explain why it's comical in a second. We'll then talk through as well some of these scenarios that I touched on in my video from 2 days ago, my weekly news video, where I talked about how there are, legitimate and plausible situations in which somebody could, mark a box, steal a card, sell a card at each step within the process. So why it could be somebody at Panini, why it could be an assembly line worker manufacturing the cards or packing the cards, why it could be somebody from whatnot. I'm going to talk you through each of those because people were so quick to judge in that live stream and say, you know what, that stuff is pure nonsense. It'll never happen. There's no incentive why they're going to do it. It's dumb. I don't like the fact that that element is being dismissed and diminished so easily. That's a very valid thing we need to talk about. And again, like I said in my last video, I'm very much sitting on the side of this being a pure coincidence, but that doesn't change the fact that we need to discuss these things because they are very plausible and have been proven to be, occurrences in the hobby in the past. And the other thing I want to flag on today as well is a negativity element that people keep trying to paint this whole process with. So keep an eye out for that as well. Now, like I said, the first thing I want to touch on is this update. Now, somebody reached out to me on Instagram. Obviously, this is via Instagram, so it's very hard for me to confirm the details or prove whether this is 100% factual. But the way it's been communicated to me is that 2 of the 4 boxes that contain those product hits were sold to Backyard Breaks from 2 individuals. So we know at least 2 of them, of the 4, came from 2 different people. Now, this is probably a good thing for Backyard Breaks because it speaks to them maybe just purely being lucky in this instance. Obviously, we need a little bit more information out of that, but if they came from one person, that might raise a few more questions. We don't know any details around the deal itself in the sense that if Backyard Breaks, as an example, we're trying to find certain serial number boxes. Again, that's purely a what-if situation. But, the fact that they've come from at least 2 different people is a good thing for them, in my opinion. It probably speaks a bit more to the randomness of, the whole situation. And again, one thing I want to flag that so many people are trying to paint Sports Card Radio with this is that they were being overly negative towards Backyard Breaks and accusing them of committing fraud, essentially. I think if you go back and watch that live stream, I think, that's certainly not the case. I'll get to this a little bit later on about people, not being able to see the forest for the trees. They're getting too stuck in on things on face value. Both the brothers themselves said that Backyard Breaks were more than likely innocent in this whole situation. If something was going on, they've probably got no idea what's happening. And both of them, if I remember correctly, alluded to the fact that this was probably coincidence more than anything else. They were 50-50 at best, if I remember correctly. So we'll touch on that a little bit further, but one thing that I do want to talk through now that was spoken about quite a lot in the live stream itself was how something like this purely couldn't happen because there's no way somebody at Panini would commit this fraud to try and make this happen. There is no way this could happen at Whatnot to try and funnel, high-end boxes to Backyard Breaks, and why an assembly line worker wouldn't do this themselves, i.e. steal the card, mark the box, give it to someone, right? They spoke about each of those key steps as to why there's no clear incentive and it doesn't make sense to do it because why wouldn't they just keep the card? Well, that's what I'm going to talk you through today, and it's going to be the main point of this video. I'm going to put up 3 scenarios and talk you through why they are very much likely plausible situations and why there's enough incentive there to suggest that something like this could happen if somebody wanted to make it happen. Yes, it's very unlikely, but that does not mean we should discuss it or purely dismiss it or discount it completely, right? These are the kinds of things that could happen. It's just very silly to dismiss them and move on. And I didn't like the fact that a bit of the conversation with people that came on that were pro Backyard Breaks, because so many people were coming on trying to defend them when they weren't really being accused of anything directly, in my opinion. They threw this stuff out there and purely dismissed this sort of stuff to make the whole process look a bit silly. It's like, no, this stuff can't happen. So the first thing I want to touch on is the theft within an assembly line, within a manufacturing process by an employee out at, one of these distribution centers or manufacturers. People basically said, okay, well, why wouldn't the person just keep the card for themselves? Now, as has been shown within the upper deck situations in the early 2000s, with regards to some of this stuff with Leaf recently, and I'm sure a few others with some of these uncut sheet situations, it'd be very likely for something like this to occur. I shouldn't say likely, sorry. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for something like this to occur, given that it's happened many times in the past. Yet when people were presented with that information about there being historical evidence of things like this happening, they were very quick to say, well, okay, well, you're talking about $1 million card with regards to the logo, man. Why wouldn't they just keep it for themselves? And my response on the live stream that I think didn't get talked about enough was the fact that, well, if you're the person stealing this card, okay, and you've got a chance to make $1 million for stealing this thing, right, and selling it. From your perspective, what do you think is the better thing to do? keep that card yourself, try and sell it yourself, and very easily get caught, because the second you list it somewhere, there's so much hype around this card. People are going to say, hang on a minute, Daniel, Dan the card man's selling this card. How did he get it? Well, hang on a minute, he works at Panini. He works in the manufacturing center. That's how he got it. And then bang, I'm arrested, committing fraud. Right? Whereas, what do you think the better situation is? Me to sit back and say, okay, guys, I've got this card. Let's try and reach out to somebody to see if they want it. I reach out to somebody on the fly that says, you know what, Daniel, I'm going to buy this card off you for 100 grand. Take it or leave it. Me personally, I'd take it. Right? And then they can pretend they busted it on camera. As an example, yes, that is a what-if situation, but that's the scenario in which somebody in the assembly line process would take that card and not keep it for themselves, because there's far less chance of getting caught on the basis that that $100,000 you're getting, right, in that situation is clean money. It's been washed. It's very similar to what mobsters do, as an example, when they use, you know, real businesses to wash the money. Basically, go look at Breaking Bad. It's the whole fundamental process behind key parts within that show, right? Washing your money. In that instance, that person can steal the card, get clean money. Yes, it's not the big end of the stick, as in not getting $1 million, but at least they're getting 100 grand that's untraceable, right? Untraceable. So when people say that situation is not plausible, I've just given you one as to why it could happen. The same thing goes from a Panini perspective, right? Somebody might say, well, why the heck would Panini want backyard breaks to get these boxes? Why wouldn't they just not care? Why wouldn't they just send them the boxes off camera, let them open it? Why does it have to be done in this process? From Panini's perspective, right, and you could argue this, and again, this is a what-if situation, but again, it's something that's very plausible they'd expect to happen, right? When you look at what businesses do on a day-to-day basis with regards to influencers, with regards to celebrities, they'll send them product to get them to wear the product, to get them to show the product in the public eye. As if Panini would not prefer their product to get busted on a live stream with the biggest breaker in the world, as opposed to just getting busted off camera by a bunch of average Joes. Like, again, that is probably on the extreme end of tinfoil hat stuff, but again, that is something very plausible. From their perspective, there would be an incentive for them to funnel that box to somebody that's breaking cards, to then get it opened up on camera to generate more and more hype around their product in general. Now, this sort of stuff, again, makes a lot of sense, because some people might say, well, okay, why would you not just give them the card or the one box in question? Why would you go to all this trouble? Which is one of those things that, you know, generating interest on camera would then therefore create, you know, potential long-term multiples in revenue for them, okay? As in, they might get people interested in these boxes and might making them bust more boxes. That's better than them selling the card themselves, as an example. Again, very out there, but that is something that is plausible, so it shouldn't be dismissed so easily. Yes, it is very, very unlikely, but you kind of say this whole situation wouldn't occur because something like that would never occur. Something like this at Panini could occur, right? So it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just very unlikely. The final point, a lot of people were talking about Whatnot, right, and their role in this. Now, if Whatnot, as an example, were involved in this hypothetical thing, and this thing was actually real and wasn't hypothetical and it wasn't just luck, which I very much likely think it is just luck, you know, from Whatnot's perspective, people will say, okay, well, if Whatnot are getting their hands on these hot boxes, why wouldn't they just take the card for themselves and sell it? Well, you probably need to do a bit more research as to how Whatnot's platform actually works, right? Their platform works off the back of getting or percentages, I should say, off the back of every sale within their platform. So from their perspective, they want more things busted on camera as much as possible, which means they've got more customers buying their product, which means they've got more customers paying them directly, right? Because they get 10% off every sale that goes through backyard breaks, as an example. Why would they not have an incentive to funnel high-end cards to backyard breaks, to get more people to come onto their platform, to get more people to bust product with backyard breaks, because they're the guys that get all the good hits? Why would they not want that to happen? That's a pretty big incentive, in my opinion. And some people might say, well, why wouldn't they just keep the card and sell it for themselves? It's $1 million. Well, you need to think long-term. If that card getting busted in a break on camera generates enough hype, and all these other cards busted on camera generate enough hype to get, you know, 1,000 new customers, they're going to spend $20 a day, as an example, or a week or whatever, long term, and they're new collectors in the hobby, they've bought into the hype, they love it. You know, I think Whatnot would much prefer in this instance to have, you know, thousands and thousands of new customers buying product consistently over a period of time. You get a percentage on a variable because you've got so many more customers now using your service, as opposed to a one-off $1 million sale. Again, very unlikely, but that's just a situation I wanted to talk you through. Like, so many people diminish those 3 steps, right? They said it couldn't happen from a manufacturer or worker's perspective. They couldn't happen out of Panini's perspective. What's the incentive for Panini? What's the incentive for Whatnot? Some of those might be a little bit weaker than the other in terms of whether or not they're actually legitimate things that could happen, but you can't deny that each of those things wouldn't happen. So when you've got these really crazy odds being hit by these backyard breaks, guys, and then you're presented with situations like this, it's very foolish to say none of those things would happen when you've got odds that are being described within this whole backyard break situation. So I just wanted to present those 3 to you. One other thing I wanted to talk through today. So before I jump on, please, you know, share your thoughts on any of those down below. I know they are what if situations, but again, I don't think they should be discounted or ignored, in my opinion. Like, they are very unlikely, but I think there's no harm in discussing those things because, they could happen. So the fact that they could happen, it's all part of a discussion, right? It's not being negative or anything like that. Let's just have a chat. That's what I'm trying to do here. When people say these things can't happen, 100% never going to happen, you're very silly because, like I explained in that first situation with regards to assembly line workers, things like that have happened at Upper Deck. They've happened like that at Leaf. I'm sure they've happened like that at Panini in the past, right? Especially with some of these hand-packed product. Like, come on, guys, get with the time. Start asking these kinds of questions. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, the next thing I want to touch on is Backyard Brad. Now, he came on trying to defend within the live stream. I'll put some things up on screen now. And whilst I felt like he had some pretty good arguments in the sense that he was willing to have a discussion, so good on the guy for going on and good on the Sports Card Radio boys for getting him on as well and willing to chat. A lot of people were like hating on both parties for the way that conversation was handled and way it went. I think primarily the reason why both parties got a bit angry with each other was primarily due to the fact that Brad, number one, came on and really wasn't prepared, even though he was spamming in chat like he was. But more importantly, he couldn't hear what they were saying. He said that multiple times and they kept talking over each other. And I think that's what drove the conversation to frustration. But the one thing I want to say to Brad, because there's talks he might be going back on as an example, that if he wants to go back on, he needs to do a bit more research because the things he was mentioning as an example as to why the numbers were wrong, right, and why the math was wrong, because he kept talking about those 16 cards that were placed in that montage or that image on screen, not a montage, a collage is the word I'm looking for. However, if he actually read the tweet, he would have realized that those cards have nothing to do with the math used. It was just the 4 product hits that were mentioned. I'll put up on screen now that are the ones factored into that probability. Now, Cblez also did this. He made this mistake on his Instagram. You would have seen my reaction to that as well, where he said the same thing. And the collectibles guru who made the tweet initially basically replied to the guy saying, "Did you even read my tweet? Because all the things you just said are wrong." So those kinds of things. The problem with Brad in particular is that he didn't do that. So he felt very emotional to come on and try and defend Backyard Breaks because he uses them. He's a customer. They've given him free shit, all this sort of stuff. He didn't read the tweet, so that impacted on his ability to have, a proper discussion. Right? If he actually sat back, read the tweet, came on with these facts and didn't he was, like, even though he was quite calm, he was definitely seeing red internally because of the way he was trying to have this debate, this discussion. Some of these guys can't see the forest for the trees. And I know I mentioned that earlier, but the reason why I'm flagging that again is because so many people see these things as being purely negativity, purely hating. And that's what Brad saw in that instance, in my opinion. He saw these guys, he thought they were hating, and he came on because he wanted to be like a knight in shining armor and defend these guys. But that really wasn't what's happening. The Sports Card Radio guys mentioned multiple times that they're not accusing Backyard Breaks of anything directly. They've said a few things with regards to how they're getting all this money, all this sort of stuff, but they both said it multiple times within that stream that if something is actually happening, if there is hanky panky going on, Backyard Breaks more than likely has no freaking idea that it's happening, right? Yet people can't see them saying that or ignore that element when they're saying that and just look at things on face value and are basically like, well, hang on a minute, these guys are being a bunch of dickheads. They're hating on these guys. Why are they hating on them? It's so accusatory. You're mentioning FBI, all this sort of stuff. It's like, mate, just take a back step, I should say. Calm down a little bit. Understand what's happening and don't just jump headfirst into these things because you look like a bit of an idiot. And I know Brad sounded like a very smart dude. He probably just needed to do his bit more research and actually read the tweet as an example. And so I hope he can go back on the show and have that discussion with the guys because I think there's an option there for these guys to have, a proper discussion. It is what it is with these people not being able to see the forest for the trees, in my opinion. They're just looking at negativity on face value and then purely running with that. This stuff is not negativity. I've said this multiple times on my channel. Nobody's accusing anyone of anything directly. We're just saying, hang on a minute, these numbers look a bit funny. Let's talk through it. There is nothing wrong with having this kind of discussion within the hobby. There is nothing wrong with it. And so many people on Instagram are hating on it and all this sort of stuff. They can't see the forest for the trees. They're just taking that negativity at face value and not looking into it deep enough, right? They're letting their emotions take over, which is what it looks like to me. So please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Like, I talk about this stuff all the time because I want to try and educate people. I want to educate myself by having discussions with people in the comments. So, please share your thoughts. I cop a bit of heat sometimes in the comments, especially the last 2 videos where people were accusing me of, being a Sports Card Radio fanboy, so on and so forth. I'm blinding my own opinions based off the back of that. Like, I think that stuff's pretty silly, but I never go after anyone, right? Like, if you go look at my comments, I'm always willing to have a chat with people and talk through these things because I want to have an open and honest discussion with people and maybe learn a few things myself. So please leave your thoughts, even if they are of an opposing view. You've got a place on my channel. I'm not one of these people that are going to hate you or be negative towards you because you have a different mindset to me, right? At the end of the day, we're all adults. We're all collectors. We're all in this hobby that we love. We need to be talking about this kind of stuff because that's how we make the hobby better in the long run. There's people that can't see the forest for the trees, in my opinion, end up reflecting poorly on the hobby in general because they rush to make content and create videos, giving their views when they're not based on fact or anything like that. They're making this content on their opinion when they haven't even done the research themselves, aka Cblez, like I touched on a bit earlier, aka, Brad in this one particular instance. They're so quick to run and defend people and do all this sort of stuff without doing the research themselves. You need to do the research. And again, I haven't done all the research in the world. I haven't checked if the math is correct, but I've not come out and said, well, hang on a minute, that math says backyard breaks is wrong, right? I've said it looks very damning. The numbers are hard to argue against because people that are much smarter than me are the ones building them, right? But at the same time, I'm saying, okay, let's look at this process end to end. Let's see where the gaps could occur. Let's see where the mistakes could occur. Let's see where the plausibility lies. All in all, I think this is a pretty big coincidence in my opinion until more information comes out. But there's nothing wrong with asking these kinds of questions. There's nothing wrong with talking through these scenarios like I've touched on today. So please share your thoughts down in the comments below like I mentioned again. And as always, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.